We've had a great introduction for the Ion Proton sequencer. We've shipped now almost 200 units. We're seeing runs now from our early access sites of 10 gigs and over, and that is the performance that we expected from the platform.
We have very much seen a scaling that is unmatched in light-based sequencing. We've already seen the PGM do a couple of factors of 10, and with Proton now, it's certainly very impressively paced.
We've very quickly figured out how to load chips to 80% plus in literally 1 week.
You know, we had the Proton installed within days. You know, now we've had it for, I guess, just under 2 months now. We're 50 runs in. You know, the increased yields have been constantly progressing over the weeks.
In terms of total data output, if you make some calculations based on various assumptions, you should be able to get somewhere around 7 to 7.5 gigabases out of a single P1 chip with 100 base read lengths. And so far, we're achieving that. We've had runs that produce 7 gigabases. If you go to the 150 base read lengths, which are just being rolled out now, you should be able to get somewhere up to about 11 gigabases, and I've seen runs from other users of over 10 gigabases. And if you expand that to 200 base pairs, you should be able to get 15 gigabases. So once again, as with all the other previous chips on the PGM, very quickly you should be able to get greater than the specified output. And that's a bonus because that effectively drives cost down.
The initial runs on the Proton were right around 4 to 5 gigs. And by the 5th run, we were up into the 8 to 10 gig range. And that was due to a couple factors. One was operator efficiency. You know, admittedly we got better loading the chips. A new loading method came out, some better reagents. So I think all coupled together, you know, has kind of springboarded us from the 4 to 6 to now to 8 to 10 and beyond probably.
It's moved at a pace that is certainly as fast as any of the other R&D projects I've been involved in.
The PGM read length is, right now we're reliably hitting 250. We know with the 300 base per kit's out, we just have not had a chance to run them yet. So we're fully anticipating being north of 300 soon. And on the Protons, we're at 150 bases. We're seeing 98, 99% accurate all the way out to 150 bases.
It's always an excitement to hear about some new Proton data because so far it's always been better than the last run.
In the past, a whole transcriptome or a whole exome project was a very complex project, required a lot of people and a lot of analysis. And what we've done with the Proton is tried to make this very simple. The workflows are simple, the software is simple, the speed is incredibly fast. It's now much simpler to do, and any lab can really do this kind of sequencing.
The engineers will come in and install it, which takes 1 to 2 days. You can make a library, whether it's a whole genome library or some other kind of library within a day. The steps to do that are fairly straightforward. You can run that through the OneTouch and perform your template prep overnight and have it on the sequencer by mid-morning the next day, and the sequencing is complete by lunchtime. It is possible to go then from an install on a Monday and have data coming out of the machine by Friday afternoon.
The 4 Protons arrived on Thursday. By Friday evening, the first runs were up and running on 3 of the 4 instruments. The 4th instrument was up and running that Saturday. So we had our first exome data Monday, Tuesday. So I don't know, so was that 4 or 5 days for all 4 instruments up and running in our laboratory. You know, that's still remarkably fast. Given typical boxes in our house is probably about 30 days for installation. So when you're talking 5 days, it's remarkable speed.
I don't see any reason why a team that has a motivated PI who has a well-defined problem that they understand well enough to know that genomics can really give them some understanding, who has a library group that has kind of basic library skills that can take a sample in and prepare it and load it on the instrument and run it, and then informatics support where they can understand how to get the data out the other end and interpret it. I think if you have kind of basic competence in terms of the lab, the definition of the experiment and the informatics. Kind of any lab that has those three things will have absolutely no problem doing really exciting and interesting things with either the PGM or the proton.
It's very, very easy to operate. I mean, we can train someone within 2 hours and they're off and running, no problem. That's how easy it is. I mean, the planning tool, you plan the run, it's really just choose the run, hit start. I mean, it's that simple. I could draw it out for you, but that's, it's remarkably easy to use.
Our experience of the Proton to get that up and running has been very quick because everything we learned on the PGM transfers directly. So anyone who's worked with that kind of workflow really shouldn't have trouble adapting. You're doing different things on the Proton, you're doing bigger work, but the workflow stays the same. People who've not had experience with PGM or solid or emulsion PCR are not going to have that much more trouble. There's a lot of automation. The kits these days are pretty stable, and they're fairly simple to use. So there really shouldn't be, there's really no major impediment to slow people down in adopting the Proton.
Affordability of this technology is really a crucial factor for a lot of laboratories. The fact that you can do an experiment for $1,000 on a Proton or a few $100s on a PGM means you can afford to make mistakes and still go back and do that experiment again and learn from it. On the other hand, you can do very big projects that are economically affordable now that you just couldn't do before.
So even 2 or 3 years ago, to buy any of the sequencing systems, you were looking at spending $1 million plus. And that's not small money. That's not easy to get hold of. So you had massive consortiums banding together. Those were then not accessible to people outside that. There was a lot of, those sorts of equipment were jealously guarded. And because they were so valuable, there wasn't a lot of access. So coming in at a very low price point has a couple of effects. Firstly, it means, well, primarily it means literally anyone can afford to buy such a system. I think that's been the single biggest contributor to getting more people sequencing and more people understanding what's possible with sequencing. It's just sheer accessibility by decreasing the cost and what it costs to buy in.
It's all about cost and data rate. If you have an instrument that is producing a higher data rate at a cheaper cost, that is always going to be the direction that the production wants to go, because production at scale wants to stay as inexpensive as possible. The exciting thing about Proton is, given where the PGM was and how it scaled, and given where the Proton is now and how it is scaling, if it can deliver on the promise of that data rate increase and the fixed cost or the relatively marginal cost increases, that then transforms what we can do as a large-scale producer.
I think you're going to have many, many more people participating. And when you've got many, many more people participating, you've got many more ideas floating around.
We'll see where the Proton can really push the field to in terms of cost and data rate. But that's what it's all about.
As soon as you start distributing equipment to people, different people can use it however they like. And I think people will start to play and experiment and do different and new things, which might not have been so obvious in a larger consortium setting.
The idea that 1 million flowers will bloom, that people will do many, many small projects, that each individual interest group in each individual gene, each individual region, each set of promoters will be able to sequence and then create some piece of knowledge about that sequence and feed that annotation back into the public record and understanding of the genome, and then have that understanding of the genome then feed back into what other people are doing. That is a kind of once-in-a-civilization effort to really define and understand the human genome. And the only way that that can happen is if a very large number of people are doing a very large and diverse number of projects. Putting sequencing technology in the hands of very many people is really, I would say, an imperative for the field to really fully understand the genome, and that's what's needed to make medicine into what it should be in the future.
The power of this technology is really its speed and its flexibility. The scientific community has never had the opportunity to generate a single exome or a transcriptome inside a few hours and have the data back inside a day. This is really going to transform the way genomic science is done.
So the fast turnaround time, I think, is absolutely key and transformative in that it will enable genomics to impact medicine kind of faster, because right now it's a bit slow.
We're using it for exome recovery and high priority exome sequencing. 12 hours per sample, much more rapid than anything on the market for us. So if we have a sample dropout, it's an instrument that's in use as of today. I mean, the validation has been completed. Mid to long term, whole genome, whole transcriptome, and then probably the latter part of 2013, 2014, some sort of single cell genomic work will be used with the Proton.
Our major application at this stage will be things like exomes. There's such a huge interest in exomes. It's such a powerful technique where it's one technique that fits many, many applications. And the opportunity to cut down the 2-week sequencing time that it takes on the larger instruments to a single afternoon means that you can get hold of data much more rapidly. And I think much more consistently. If we run one of the long-run instruments over 2 weeks, the computing cluster is sitting idle, and then this huge amount of data appears and it starts to grind. Whereas if we're producing 1 to 2 exomes a day, that computing will be running continuously, and you get hold of data in a much smoother manner.
The Proton will have a huge role, I think, in driving the field to faster, better exome on a faster turnaround time, which is going to open up really possibilities that I don't know that I fully appreciate in terms of how it's going to impact health.
The ability to profile 1,000 samples in one shot in hours, you can see a path where every sample in your library, your biobank, can be profiled. And all of a sudden now the samples that were deemed, not enough sample, you can go in and profile all these and start to categorize them for importance.
We've already scaled the technology by 1,000-fold in less than 2 years, from 10 megabases to 10 gigabases. We need less than a 10-fold scaling to get to a whole human genome, so the path is really very clear.
This is different than what's happened before, right? In the past, people have used this camera-based, light-based sequencing that has some kind of natural scaling issues, and certainly with semiconductor technology, the scaling issues are very different. There's a much broader dynamic range of scaling that's achievable. At some point you run into physical limits, but I think that in terms of where you are in terms of semiconductor technology now on the PGM and on the Proton, those physical limits are pretty far away. There's obviously data acquisition issues, the ability to just acquire the scale of data that you might be able to make. But because you're already on a silicon wafer, that issue is eased somewhat by the fact that you can kind of plug directly into the system and really do the data acquisition kind of right off of the detector in a way that you can't on a light-based technology.